Hello and welcome to Sprott Radio. I'm your host, Ed Coyne, Senior Managing Partner at Sprott Asset Management. I'm pleased today to welcome Alan Howard. Alan is a Principal Analyst in Cloud and Data Center Research Practice at Omdia. Alan, thank you for joining Sprott Radio.
Oh, I'm really pleased to be here. Thanks for having me, Ed.
Alan, before we go into a topic that I think is near and dear to probably your heart as well as Sprott's heart, the growing relationship between tech and energy, let's start with talking a bit about your background and some of the work you're doing today in the company you work with.
Sure. The company I work for is called Omdia, but actually we're just a division inside a much larger organization. Informa Group is based in London, and it has a very broad media and events business. And inside Informa Group is a division called Informa Tech. So Omdia is the research arm inside of Informa Tech, and Informa Tech runs things like Data Center World and Black Hat. And if you're in the IT industry, those names would resonate right away. I've been in the IT industry for 40 years. I've been studying data centers for much of that time. I've been here at Omdia for a little over 6 years. And in particular, what I do is I study people that run, operate, build data centers. So the big data center operators, what do their portfolios look like? What kind of data centers are they building? Things of that nature.
Well, that's obviously evolved substantially over the last couple of decades. 40 years ago to today, you've seen tremendous growth. Can you talk a bit about, that's probably an understatement, right?
You're right, yeah.
Can you talk about what's happening as it relates to energy and tech, how those two are sort of being fused together today? We really can't think about one without thinking about the other. Can you just walk us through that evolution, what you've witnessed over those 4 decades of being in this space?
There's probably a dozen different market dynamics that really play into the whole thing. But generally speaking, what's occurred over the last couple of decades is just the evolution of a digital economy. And so that's both on the business side and consumer side. I think one of the things that if you're not really in tune with what a data center is, if you just think about your phone, everything you do on your phone touches data centers. So when you transact something, when you make a phone call, when you send a text, it all seems like it goes to a cell tower and then, I don't know. But what happens at the cell towers, generally speaking, is that signal gets converted into a digital signal. It goes across fiber optic cables and it traverses a number of data centers. So whether it's on your computer or your phone, these data centers are what's processing and making all those things happen. So you can imagine how it's grown over time. But I'll throw in 2 other things that I think are specifically pivotal in terms of the evolution. And one is as cloud services really began to take off. And so cloud services started, a dozen years ago, roughly speaking. You can argue that different ways. But as they caught on with the business world, that drove up demand quite a bit. And so it was probably about 2018, roughly, when the wheels came off in terms of expanding data center capacity to handle all this digital economy. And then when the pandemic hit, that was another big catalyst because people found themselves sheltering in place and they needed new services. If you're an analyst and you're studying this market, it's been a really wild ride. We've updated a number of our forecasts over and over again, as we learn more about new announcements with regard to AI hardware and things like that. So it's a pretty wild ride.
Well, you talk about sheltered in place, it seems like COVID has kickstarted a lot of things that were going to organically happen over time. A more flexible work schedule, working from home, working from different locations, the need for more data, the need for, more AI to, assist. Did it fast forward all this by a decade or two? Are we sort of caught off guard as far as energy needs and so forth? What happened because of COVID as far as the trajectory of all this? Did it expedite it or was it already kind of happening?
Well, in terms of data centers expanding to handle the additional demand created by COVID, yeah, we're already in a market growth situation where if you look at the biggest builders of data centers, they are so tooled up with people and processes and so on and so forth to expand data centers that the wheels are already in motion. Now, with the rise of AI, that's been yet another catalyst that'll drive additional expansion, but as importantly, it's also creating a new set of companies that are looking to, ride the coattails of this wave and create data center campuses. The big guys, Amazon, Google, Meta, Microsoft, they're hoping to land some of that business. So there's a number of different things that are going on.
And those are the big players, as you mentioned, the Microsofts, the Amazons, and so forth of the world here in the U.S. I was surprised to see that. I guess they equate to maybe, a couple hundred, maybe 500 total data centers, but there's over 10,000, if I'm reading that correctly, globally. That's got to be a major draw on kind of our energy and our resources that we need today. Is that number a real number, or is that inflated?
The 10,000?
Yeah.
Oh, that's way low. But
Way
let
low.
me
Okay.
let me characterize it. We look at it from a power capacity perspective. So how much power capacity is at data centers now, and how will that grow over time? And I want to make a quick point here, and that is that there are two different conversations. There's a conversation about power capacity. How much capacity do I need to meet peak loads when they occur? And I find that a lot of people I speak to are often talking about power consumption. Power consumption is a different subject. It's the amount of power that actually get used. What would I pay my utility? But power capacity is what we have to build up to be able to be sure we can meet those peak loads when everybody's shopping on Amazon for Christmas.
Between real estate and energy creation and energy consumption, is that becoming a bigger topic, or is that overblown right now given kind of where we are in the universe? What's the reality behind that?
That's a really good question, because the reality behind it is, in the data center industry, there's big builders like Amazon, Google, Meta, and Microsoft.
Mm-hmm.
And I would love to give you the whole history, but I'll summarize it by saying that Greenpeace started putting out reports, I think in 2014, picking on tech industries for the amount of power they were consuming and how much greenhouse gases they emitted. And that was the catalyst that started driving the industry to a very high focus on sustainability. And so when we speak about what I refer to as hyperscalers, which is Amazon, Google, Meta, and Microsoft, and you look at their sustainability reports, I mean, they're very transparent nowadays. Sustainability is at the top of their list. And so you can't run a data center, generally speaking, without grid power. So now you're at the mercy of your mix. And so in fact, I would say almost all the big operators have a high focus on it. The big hyperscale cloud folks.
Everything I've come across seems to be focused on not just the sustainability, but the dependability of these things. Data centers and AI, they have to be, by definition, a 24/7 business, right? They can't have brownouts, rolling brownouts, and so forth.
Yeah.
For some reason, it's okay for our home to have a brownout, but you can't have these things have a brownout. I mean, if my phone stops working for 10 minutes, I panic. I can't imagine what someone in their, teens or 20s would do if their phone stopped working for a few minutes. So how are these data centers trying to tackle that? Because you mentioned that they all live off the grid. The grid, as we know, isn't 100% defendable or predictable. So how are they combating that going forward? What kind of backups do they have?
It's rare to have a data center that doesn't have backup power. And so right now, the primary go-to is diesel generators. And what's shocking, if you look at aerial views of data centers, around the outside of the building, there's all this infrastructure, and it's a combination of power and cooling equipment. But the number of generators is just staggering. But that's evolving too, right? I mean, one of the conversations in the industry is, how can we get to a generatorless data center? That's going to be a long ways off. But I talked about diesel generators. So one of the evolutions that's occurred is the use of a different kind of fuel that puts less greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. It's called HVO.
In some of the reading and some of the conversations I've had, these smaller, modular reactors on the nuclear front are coming up in conversations as a potential solution. So from your point of view, is that fact or fiction? Are we going to see a point in time where data centers are going to have their own energy sources, where they're literally creating and storing and consuming energy and effectively own their own nuclear power plant? Is that a scientific kind of forward-looking aspirational thing, or are you seeing conversations start to happen around that? What, you're on the front line. What are you seeing out there?
I have ongoing relationships, not just with the data center industry, but the nuclear industry. And so we spend quite a bit of time talking to people at Idaho National Labs and actually some of the other national labs. I really think that off into the future, it will become commonplace. I don't think there's really a choice. And so the notion of small modular reactors or microreactors makes a lot of sense. However, there's a lot of debate about how soon, when, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we see some very positive activity going on, but that positive activity is, generally speaking, test reactors. The industry is going to need to evolve in the sense that once we get past the test reactor phase and now it's commercially viable to take an SMR and put it somewhere and create a baseload source for whether it's data centers or steel mills or other industrial applications, that's going to be probably 10 years. Let's say we even have SMRs ready to be built for commercial application in 5 years. It'll be another number of years before the supply chain, the economics, everything else sort of comes together. We ran a workshop at Data Center World in Washington, D.C. in April. It was an all-morning workshop. We had great attendance. We had 200, 250 people from the data center community in the room. And primarily it was a couple of representatives from Idaho National Labs speaking. We had been working to develop this for a long time because what wasn't happening is different industries getting together. The nuclear industry has been off on its own for a long time. I mean, research and development has been going on for a darn long time. Essentially, SMRs have been in submarines for 60, 70 years, something like that.
Right.
What brought all these people together was the realization that, it may be 5 years before it's commercially viable and 10 years before it's broadly commercialized. But the time to start talking to the industries that will be the consumers is now. And so you have nuclear in the government, you have the private nuclear research and development folks, and then you got the consumers, again, whether it's data centers or other types of industries. To have a viable business model and reasonable economics, the argument is these industries need to be talking to each other now, understanding how things work, understanding, I'm operating my business with these kinds of margins based on this kind of power generation. I want to be using green power, but we'll need for the business models of these nuclear companies to evolve in a way that makes sense for the consumers. We do power forecasts. We do all kinds of forecasts, obviously. That's what a research company does. If I look at 2023, global data center capacity was about 100 gigawatts. When I first started talking to Idaho National Labs a couple of years ago, when I told them that, they were shocked. Oh my God, you're kidding. We need to start talking to some of these people. The forecast going out in 2030 is for 230 gigawatts. That's crazy. My point is that, okay, so the forecast is there given everything falls into place just like it's supposed to. There's a lot of market dynamics at play, a lot of moving parts. What if the supply chain isn't able to handle delivering all that AI hardware? What if the power grids in various countries just can't support it? And so there's a lot of variables in there. You can do a forecast like that. If everything, all the ducks line up, then that's a tremendous amount of power. I forget exactly what it is for the U.S., but it's big. And if you think about a large-scale nuclear power plant, you're talking a little over 3 gigawatts in just rough numbers. And so it takes 10 years to build a nuclear power plant. That's not going to solve this problem. Power is a big issue. And one of the things that we read a lot about in the press is that, we're running out of power here and there. And so, there are power constrained markets, but I think one of the things that people need to understand is that it's not that we're running out of power in the United States. It's that people keep demanding more power in markets that are strained, right? So if you think about these hyperscale guys, because Amazon, Google, Meta, and Microsoft, they build a tremendous amount of data centers and they're really big. But you know what? They build a lot of them out in the middle of nowhere. Nebraska, Iowa, Kansas, so on and so forth. And so when we talk about, is there going to be enough power for all this AI stuff? There's power out there. If you start learning more about the electric grid and transmission and regulation, and the fact that there are different areas around the country where if I have excess energy, I can't give it to one of my neighbors because there's no transmission infrastructure, or perhaps there's some kind of regulatory issues. One of the things that's kind of interesting is that if I want to build a data center, I have to have a parcel of land that has three characteristics. It has to have power, it has to have reasonable access to network fiber, and as a general rule, it's going to have water. And that trifecta right there is complicated. But one of the things that we've seen, and we've seen it for a long time now, is these companies buying parcels of land that make sense for building a data center and land banking them. A ton. Because land is...
What's land banking? I haven't heard that.
Land banking is I'm buying a parcel here in this place because it's got all the right characteristics, but I don't need it. Why would I buy it if I don't need it? Well, because if it has all the right characteristics, somebody else is probably going to find it. And so they're banking all this land. And so the big cloud guys that build data centers, the big co-location guys that build data centers, acquire this land because land is a very small percentage of the cost of building a data center. When we build data centers, we talk about it in terms of power. What does it cost to build a data center? It costs 8 to 12 million a megawatt. I mean, that's how important power is.
Yeah, I love that quote, power is life. It's such a true and direct quote, but it's very true.
I hope I can see how this AI thing evolves before I retire.
Yeah, you and me both. Well, how can someone keep track of you, follow the work you guys are doing? What resources would you recommend out there for those that we've piqued their interest and want to keep track of this evolution?
Actually, probably the best is just LinkedIn. If you're interested in this stuff, there's a website, just omdia.com, and there's blogs there about a lot of these subjects.
This is great. Well, Alan, I appreciate you taking the time. I wrote a ton of notes. I was learning along the way, and I thought I prepared pretty well for this, but I learned even more. So this was really great. So thank you all for listening. Once again, I'm Ed Coyne, your host, and thank you for listening to Sprout Radio.
This podcast is provided for information purposes only from sources believed to be reliable. However, Sprout does not warrant its completeness or accuracy. Any opinions and estimates constitute our judgment as of the date of this material and are subject to change without notice. Past performance is not indicative of future results. This communication is not intended as an offer or solicitation for the purchase or sale of any financial instrument. Any opinions and recommendations herein do not take into account individual client circumstances, objectives, or needs, and are not intended as recommendations of particular securities, financial instruments, or strategies. You must make your own independent decisions regarding any securities, financial instruments, or strategies mentioned or related to the information herein. This communication may not be redistributed or retransmitted in whole or in part, or in any form or manner without the express written consent of Sprott. Any unauthorized use or disclosure is prohibited. Receipt and review of this information constitutes your agreement not to redistribute or retransmit the contents and information contained in this communication without first obtaining express permission from an authorized officer of Sprott.